Some interesting predictions for the Buccaneers in free agency as they look to turn their team around from disappointments in 2025 to contenders in 2026.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'd like to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. I am your host, James Yarcho, writer over at Bucs Report, covering the Buccaneers for over a decade, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. Talking about the cornerback position and the questions surrounding that, as well as whether or not the Buccaneers would be willing to go all in on the linebacker position in free agency. That's all coming up in a little bit. But I'm going to start today off with an interesting article from Greg Auman over at FOX Sports. Shout out Greg Auman, godfather of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And he goes through the top 100 free agents and predicts where all of them are going to sign. Now, Greg knows the Buccaneers as well as anyone, but this was surely a painstaking process to go through 100. First off, to rank the top 100 free agents, but then to go through and find who he thinks they're going to sign with based on, team needs and the right fits for those players, with free agency beginning in just under a month. That said, he has a couple of players linked to the Buccaneers. We're going to start with free agent number 96. We're going from lowest to highest here, and that is running back Tyler Allgeier. Now, I've mentioned Allgeier quite a few times ever since the hiring of Zach Robinson, and that's because he's a perfect fit to replace Rachaad White and to come in and reunite with Zach Robinson and play in that system where he had so much success. Auman said, quote, Allgeier, 25, has operated in the shadow of Bijan Robinson the last 3 years, playing second fiddle after rushing for 1,000+ yards as a rookie in 2022. He's averaged a good, not great, 4.3 yards per carry on the way to 719 rushing yards per season, and he's averaged 155 carries since Robinson's arrival, so there's less wear on him as well. Could he land with former Falcons offensive coordinator Zach Robinson in Tampa? His 18 career touchdowns show that coaches can trust him near the goal line, end quote. That is a great point that I haven't really brought up very much, and that is that the Bucs have struggled to find that goal line back after, over the last few seasons, and that's another area where Allgeier can elevate the Bucs offense while taking over that RB2 role that Rachaad is leaving vacant. Now, before we continue, I have to mention this. Free agent number 74 is Cade Otton, who Auman predicts will go to the Jaguars to reunite with Liam Cohen. So that would leave a glaring hole in the Bucs offense. And then Auman also has Rachaad White going to the Carolina Panthers. That would kind of surprise me a little bit. I understand reuniting with with Dave Canales, but it seems like Rachaad really wants to find his way to reunite with Jaden Daniels in Washington and join the Commanders. We'll see how that plays out. And then Auman also predicts that Levante David will retire and that Jamel Dean will sign with the Detroit Lions. Next up is free agent number 32. So no free agent signings for the Bucs from number 96 all the way up to number 32, but that is linebacker Nakobe Dean. Another player that we've talked about a lot as a great fit for the Bucs with their need at the linebacker position, and he is a really, really good fit in this Todd Bowles defense. Auman has him signing with the Buccaneers, saying, quote, Dean, 25, has been limited by injuries throughout 4 seasons in Philadelphia. His peak was 128 tackles in 2024 in a Super Bowl season for the Eagles, though a knee injury sidelined him for most of the playoffs and through the first month of this season. He can get to the quarterback, 7 sacks and 16 tackles for loss in his first 2 seasons, but his durability is a question mark. The Eagles used a first-round pick on Jahad Campbell last year, so maybe they've already decided on Dean's future. How much can Dean get as a free agent? There's a wide range of projections, but he's likely in the $8 million a year vicinity, end quote. This is kind of a risk, right? Dean can perform and he can do so at a high level, but is he going to be on the field for an entire season? While I haven't really gotten into that aspect of Nakobe Dean's history in the NFL, he did miss 7 games last season, 2 in 2024 and 12 in 2023. That is going to hurt his market value because that plays into the equation. Thus Allman's prediction of $8 million a year when he's worth much, much more than that if he plays all 17 games. So are the Bucs willing to take that risk with the upside being so high, but leaving themselves vulnerable to have to go back and rely on guys that have not proven that they can be starters in this league, a la Servassier Dennis, who would be a great third guy in, as part of a rotation or, to fill in for a drive or a couple of snaps. That is where we're going to have to really wait and see. Next, free agent number 15, Mike Evans. This is going to be the biggest speculation on the part of Bucs fans, and I got lots of hate for my take the other day when I said that while I want Evans to return, there also has to be a point where you have to make a decision and let him walk if the price gets too high. People were absolutely not happy with me saying that, but Auman says, quote, Evans, 32, has a Hall of Fame resume already with 108 career touchdown catches, so this is a 3-way fork. Does he retire at 32, coming off a year when he played only 8 games due to hamstring and collarbone injuries? Does he come back and try to help the Bucs to one more playoff berth after a down 2025? Or if the outside offers are compelling enough, does he finish his career elsewhere? He made $20.5 million a year on his last deal, but SpotTrack only has him projected to $13 million for 2026. It's likely he finishes his career with the Bucs, but leave open the slim chance he goes somewhere like Houston, close to his hometown of Galveston, with a strong contender he could help, end quote. So even Allman is basically saying, mentally prepare yourself for that chance that he decides he wants to end his career somewhere else for one reason or another. Again, I'm not rooting for it. I'm not saying that the Bucs should just wish him the best and send him on his way, but there is that chance that he decides to leave, and everyone kind of needs to mentally prepare for that being in the realm of possibility. Then, for what it's worth, Allman has Trey Hendrickson signing with the Bears, and then a player that we talked about yesterday, David Njoku, signing with the Atlanta Falcons, which would be less than ideal. That was the whole based on Allman's predictions, which, I mean, it's not bad by any means, but it's not enough to help you on the defensive side, obviously. You got one big name free agent at linebacker, but then the other 2 signings were an in-house return and then a running back. No defensive linemen, no edge rushers. So that makes me wonder if Allman believes that the Bucs are going to go really hard after Max Crosby to address that issue, or if he thinks they're just going to roll with whoever they can draft, along with Yaya Diaby, Anthony Nelson, and David Walker. To me, that's not enough, because if you miss on that draft pick, you are no better off than you were last year or the year before. So if you're Jason Light and your plan is going all in on getting Crosby, then you have to make sure that you come away with him no matter what. You have to understand that there is a point of no return there. This trade negotiation cannot drag on for weeks while the other edge rushers are getting scooped up in free agency, and then you're left out in the dark with absolutely nothing. I think Bucs fans would be happy with this kind of free agency, but I'm still left wondering what they would do at edge rusher as well as tight end if Cade Otton walks, and then you're not getting an Njoku, you're not getting Okonkwo, who Allman has returning to the Titans, and you're not getting Isaiah Likely, like Evan talked about on yesterday's show. Things are looking bleak on the Jamel Dean front unless he's willing to take less money to stay in Tampa. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. If you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your post to the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster, and they boost your post to the people who are the best match for your role. That makes the real difference. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, check out the Everydayer Club. You can check out the All Access tier while you're there. There are lots of perks. All Access members, you get ad-free episodes, one-on-one texting with me, discounts at the merch store, and then coming up in a couple weeks, we have the Scouting Combine. There's going to be All Access exclusive episodes coming out of Indianapolis. You're not going to want to miss that. I had someone text me and bring this up, and I feel that it's a worthy discussion because it's not one that we've really had very much. But we just talked about Auman's prediction of Jamel Dean going to Detroit. So Tom texted in and he said, I'm still really nervous about our DBs going into 2026. What are we doing with Dean? What if Zion has another down or injury year? What if Morrison also can't stay healthy? I think the DB I have the most faith in right now is Parrish of everyone back there. Can JJ Roberts come back healthy and continue to show flashes like he did before the injury? Can we re-sign Izzy? I get that the front seven needs to be the priority, but man, the back end of our defense makes me very uneasy, end quote. So this is a really good question because it is a little bit of a concern, right? Now, I wouldn't say that I'm overly concerned, but there is some doubt back there. There is the unknown, which is really what's causing the uneasiness. We don't know who Zion is at this point, right? Incredible 2024, then a huge step back in 2025. We don't know who Morrison is, right? Because the injuries were constant and his performance was inconsistent because of that. Now, I will say that hopefully they get these soft tissue injuries a bit more under control now that the Bucs quietly appear to have fired their strength and conditioning coach. But in that Florida heat, dealing with varying levels of dehydration, it's not going to go completely away. But do you bring back Jamel Dean to play that rotational role after the way he performed in 2025? Obviously, that would be great. You would love to get him back. However, the financials are going to be the biggest issue. Mason Cameron of PFF wrote up who he believes will be the highest paid free agent at every position, and he listed Jamel Dean at corner. Cameron said, quote, entering his age 30 season, Jamel Dean has a resume of consistency that is rarely seen at the cornerback position. Coverage play is volatile, with even the best players riding through the peaks and valleys. Yet, Dean has been able to produce a PFF coverage grade above 72 in each of his 7 seasons as a pro. Dean profiles as one of the game's stalwart outside cornerbacks with his 86.9 PFF coverage grade on the outside, ranking 4th among all qualifying cornerbacks. At around an $18 million average annual value, Dean would position himself among the 15 highest paid cornerbacks, with his deal taking on a similar structure to that of Carlton Davis, Byron Murphy, and Charvarius Ward, who each signed 3-year, $54 million contracts last offseason. Cameron's prediction for Jamel Dean was 3 years, $55 million. You think the Bucs are going to pay that for him? Like, I don't. And honestly, I really don't think anyone should. Yes, he is a really good corner, but That's borderline elite money for a guy that hasn't played a full season since ever. And yes, I realize the irony of saying that when I just talked about the Bucs signing Nakobe Dean, but that isn't going to cost the Bucs almost $20 million a season. A deal for Nakobe is likely going to be lower guaranteed money with more incentives, including playing time, and then shorter term, so that he can try to capitalize on playing at a high level for hopefully 17 games and re-enter free agency where he can get a larger payday. For Jamel, it would be great to keep him, but not at that price. So what do the Bucs do at corner? Do they rely solely on McCollum and Morrison as their starting outside corners in hopes that Morrison plays a full season and then McCollum returns to form, or do they bring in someone else? I would lean towards bringing in someone else, and it might even be a guy in the first round if you can land a game-changing corner at 15. If the top linebackers and edge rushers are gone, you can get the number one, maybe the number two corner, a top tier guy, that not only gives you insurance if McCollum struggles or Morrison goes down, but it gives you a starting caliber player that can take over if McCollum doesn't play well this season, and the Bucs can get out from that contract with only $2 million in dead money heading into 2027. Or you can go the free agent route. You aren't going to attract a big name guy unless the understanding is that Morrison is the odd man out, at least to start the season. He was drafted in the second round for a reason. The Bucs view him as a future every down starter at that position. And, there is that possibility that he may have to wait a little bit longer. Guys that jump out to me that you could bring in that won't break the bank, but could also be reliable starters are Jonathan Jones, Tre'Davious White, and Roger McCreary. Now, if you really want to get crazy and go after somebody closer to that top tier, you have Josh Jobe and Greg Newsome out there, but that's going to cost you north of $10 million a year. And, while that's going to sting a little bit, it's also going to really help solidify the secondary. Then you have one of those two plus Morrison or McCollum going into 2027 and beyond. I don't think they go that route because the best way to solidify the secondary is by getting an elite pass rush, and that's where the vast majority of this money needs to go. But I think they bring in someone else to replace Dean at some, in some capacity. More than likely, it's going to be a guy that's going to be the number 3 outside corner with McCollum and Morrison as your starters. Then you still have Kindle Vildor as a pending free agent. And while he was primarily a special teams guy, he did take some meaningful snaps on defense last season. You could certainly bring him back. He knows the system. He won't cost much. Or you could bring in someone of the same caliber to utilize in the same way. Rock Ya-Sin, we saw the way he performed with the Detroit Lions, basically coming in off the street, did a great job against the Buccaneers in that primetime game. You have Adoree Jackson, you have Cam Lewis, Avonte Maddox, those level of players that are going to be, a couple of $1 million, the same as Kindle Vildor. You still need gunners and special teams coverage guys that can play on defense on occasion. And all of those guys would end up fitting the bill. I would say at this point, it's extremely unlikely that Jamel Dean returns to Tampa. He's going to get a lot of money thrown his way, and I'm not really sure that he turns that down to return to a place where he watched them draft essentially who was supposed to be his replacement last year, and then took a pay cut instead of being outright released. Yes, he said that he took the pay cut because he wanted to stay in Tampa. He loves playing in Tampa, and that hasn't changed. He still loves Tampa. He won a Super Bowl here. But at the same time, he's still just 29 years old, and this is likely his last chance to get a huge payday coming off arguably the best season of his career. Could the Buccaneers really go for broke at the linebacker position? One analyst seems to think so. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. The winter games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. That's why following the winter games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports that you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. Look, I don't care what anybody says. My wife makes fun of me all the time because I love curling. I find it to be one of the most exciting and fun games to watch during the Winter Olympics. It's always my favorite, but this year the hockey is going to steal the show. We get the NHL players back in the fold. I absolutely cannot wait for USA and Canada to face off with one another after what happened last year at the Four Nations tournament. It's going to reignite that incredible rivalry. Even niche events become must watch when you're fully locked in to the competition. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. The Winter Games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. Up here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, and while I was looking up info for this episode, I stumbled across an article over on PFF about the best landing spots for the 10 highest graded free agents. Now, that particular article had Jamel Dean's best landing spot as the Miami Dolphins. He gets to stay in Florida, would give them their highest graded corner in years, so on and so forth. But what really caught my attention was another player that could stay in the state of Florida and just move a little bit further south. This one was also written by Mason Cameron, and he picked the Buccaneers as the best landing spot for linebacker Devin Lloyd. Now, I know a couple of people already that just started jumping up and down and cheering because I got a lot of messages from the insiders and DMs and things like that, talking about trading for Devin Lloyd during the season. This is a guy that a lot of Bucs fans want to see in pewter and red. Now, Cameron said, quote, "The Jaguars opted against picking up Devin Lloyd's fifth-year option last offseason, to which he responded by producing his best season yet, earning second-team All-Pro honors. The 27-year-old posted the second highest PFF overall grade, 89.1, among qualifying linebackers during the regular season, finishing as the only linebacker with an 80-plus PFF grade in run defense, 83.2, coverage, 81.1, and pass rush, 82.2. The Buccaneers struggled mightily at the linebacker position this season, with the unit as a whole ranking 28th in PFF overall grade. Levante David is weighing retirement, and Servassier Dennis ranked 90th out of 94 qualifying linebackers in PFF coverage grade, 30.5 this past season. So upgrading the position with Lloyd would be an immediate boost," end quote. Now, in Auman's article, he predicted that Devin Lloyd would return to Jacksonville, but I could see him wanting to leave considering they didn't have enough faith in him to pick up his fifth-year option. He was the fourth-ranked free agent in that Greg Auman article, and SpotTrack's prediction is that Lloyd would get north of $20 million per year in average annual value. So is this something that the Buccaneers would be willing to do or would even consider? I will say this. If they try to enter negotiations to trade for Crosby, and it looks as though that's just not something that is realistically going to happen, I can absolutely see them going after Devin Lloyd and being willing to pay that amount of money for a game-changing linebacker. They'll still have to go out and sign an edge rusher, but that means they can look to Mafe or Owe instead of Trey Hendrickson, even Mack on a one-year deal to bridge them to 2027. They could still get someone that provides an instant and noticeable impact that improves the defense, but instead of spending $25 million on Trey or $30 million on Crosby, now you have the middle of your defense solidified for the next handful of seasons by getting the best linebacker, in my opinion, on the market. It is a massive upgrade for the defense overall, and he immediately becomes a vital contributor that fits seamlessly into Bull's defense. He is the guy that truly can do it all, a la Levante David. He can go sideline to sideline. He can stop the run. He can blitz. He can drop into coverage. His PFF grade over the last two seasons was an 86.8, which was fifth among all defensive free agents, trailing Khalil Mack, Trey Hendrickson, Bobby Wagner, and Devin Bush. This would be a monster addition that would make Bucs fans just go over the moon with excitement, but it cannot stop there. That's the biggest thing. You can't drop $20 million on an off-ball linebacker, on average over a 3 or a 4 year deal and think that the defense is done. You still have to add those other key pieces along the edge and along the defensive line, because Lloyd doesn't come in and fix those problems by himself. He does, elevate the overall play of the defense. He helps solidify the second level. He's, probably one of your defensive captains for the length of his contract, and he is going to make some game-changing plays for you. On top of that, if you get Lavonte David back for one more run, he's alluded to the fact that he has not decided on retirement, and, he is thinking about returning if he feels that, last season was a little bit of a one-off because of the knee injury. He still, loves the idea of playing for Todd Bowles. That duo could do unbelievable damage because both guys can do everything. So now you have the problem, if you're an offensive coordinator, game planning for not just Todd Bowles' defense, but game planning for those players. You don't know which one's going to drop, which one's going to blitz. You couldn't attack one or the other in the run game or the pass game because both of them are incredibly solid at both. It was easier for offensive coordinators last year to game plan by attacking Servassier Dennis. They knew Lavonte was a step slower, but he was still reliable. He still wasn't going to give up tons of big plays. You could attack Servassier. If you have a duo of Lloyd and David in the middle of that defense, that's bad news. That is bad news for opposing running backs, opposing tight ends, and opposing quarterbacks. This is the kind of move that could honestly transform the defense from what it was to what we know it can be. Now, it's a long shot. It's bordering on a pipe dream, but it's not out of the question if Jason Light got the green light from the Glazers to do whatever it takes to give Bowles the weapons that he needs to make this one of the most feared defenses in the NFL once again, like we saw in 2020 and 2021. Devin Lloyd is a massive leap in the right direction. And I would argue that if they miss out on Crosby, if they can't get a trade worked out, and the consolation prize is that they decide to spend that money on getting Devin Lloyd, you're going to be very, very happy with what he brings to this defense. That's going to do it for this episode. Please check out everything going on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @Yarcho_Bucs, Instagram and TikTok at Locked On Bucs in both of those places. Subscribe on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Check out the Everydayer Club in the All Access tier. You can click the link in the show notes. Go to lockedonbucs.supercast.com. If you want to support the show, but you don't want to join the Everydayer Club, it's real simple. Like this episode on YouTube. Leave a 5-star review wherever you get podcasts. It does help other Buccaneers fans find the show. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.